Hi, I'm Ethan Miller, and I want to talk to you about a simpler, better time when we were all this close to being. This was the Cuban Missile Crisis. It happened during the Cold War, a conflict between the two economic ideologies of capitalism and communism. The statement off of which I'm going to be basing this documentary, my thesis, if you will, is that the resolution of the Cuban Missile Crisis was a remarkable display of diplomacy on the parts of both John F. Kennedy and Nikita Khrushchev. It was also a demonstration of the weakening of the Iron Curtain, a barrier that arose during the Cold War and divided the Eastern and Western hemispheres. Please enjoy.
On October 16, 1962, in the midst of the Cold War, it became known that Soviet nuclear missiles were being transported to Cuba. In response, the United States government set up a naval blockade to prevent the missiles from entering the country. This enraged Nikita Khrushchev, the premier of the Soviet Union, beginning the Cuban Missile Crisis. The U.S. made the first move with Operation Mongoose, an attempt to overthrow the communist regime in Cuba. The mission was a failure, which was kept under wraps, likely due to John F. Kennedy not being able to afford losing any more reputability after the Bay of Pigs in 1961. Operation Mongoose further enraged Fidel Castro, the ruler of Cuba at the time. However, he had little power over the matter of the crisis, seeing as the nation of Cuba was militarily inferior to the U.S. and Russia. On the same day that he set up the blockade around Cuba, John F. Kennedy sent a letter to Nikita Khrushchev demanding that he dismantle all nuclear bases in Cuba and return all Soviet missiles back to Russia. This letter would be the first in a series of direct and indirect communications between JFK and Khrushchev throughout the crisis. Shortly after sending his first letter, John F. Kennedy went on national television to describe the crisis and its ramifications. He was very stern and authoritative, even hinting at a potential quarantine. He then went on to prepare the United States for an attack on Cuba to forcibly remove the missile bases there. While Kennedy's public broadcast did cause quite a stir among the American public, the military blockade did little to stop Soviet ships from coming into Cuba, seeing as they didn't harbor anything that could be classified as weapons. And in response to Kennedy's letter, Khrushchev sent a letter saying that the military blockade was an act of aggression and that any Soviet ships would be ordered to move forward past the blockade. Kennedy didn't see a lot of other options besides war with Cuba, and while he did put a little bit more faith into the diplomatic channel, he began preparing for war with Cuba, bringing the Air Force to DEFCON 2. The public was convinced that war was imminent. Just as it seemed that war was about to begin, ABC News correspondent John Scully announced that he was approached by a Russian agent proposing a deal wherein the USSR removes its missile bases from Cuba and the U.S. does not invade the island. While White House officials were scrambling to decide whether or not to agree with what they saw as a back-channel offer, Nikita Khrushchev sent JFK a letter, a very emotional one, describing that he did not want the U.S. and the USSR to engage in thermonuclear war as it would result in the end of the world. This was able to buy both the U.S. and the USSR some time to peacefully negotiate the issue. Shortly after his first one, Nikita Khrushchev sent JFK another letter detailing a new deal wherein the U.S. removes the missiles it had previously placed in Turkey and the USSR removes its missiles from Cuba. In a bold and risky diplomatic move, JFK decided to respond to Khrushchev's first letter and ignore his second one. Kennedy's bold strategy, however, didn't work, and he eventually had to cave in, removing U.S. missiles from Turkey. But the funny thing there is that he actually kept the removal a secret and didn't do the removal until about a month after the missile bases in Cuba were dismantled. But nevertheless, it got done, and the world had avoided the apocalypse.
Wasn't that something? You know, it's moments like those that replenish my optimism in regards to world affairs. It just goes to show that when you boil it down, when the stakes are at their highest, humans are willing to make compromises. They're willing to do what has to be done for the sake of peace. I'll see you around.